here. We are getting ready for the upcoming NFL draft. There is so much to talk about, and joining me today is ESPN draft analyst and also Reese's Senior Bowl executive director Jim Nagy to talk about something that is so relevant for the Lions right now, their participation in the Senior Bowl. Jim, I mean, this is a huge thing that the Lions were able to do. We didn't really think about it that much back then, but now with the way things look heading into the draft, no pro days, a limited schedule for these guys to get to know players, seems like the Lions coach in the Senior Bowl could really help them out as they head into the draft.
Yeah, Tori, good to see you again. Saw you down here in Mobile that week. Thanks for having me on. It's big. It was always going to be big for the Lions, just their participation, but the way things have played out with this COVID-19, it even puts more of an emphasis on it. I really think that, any draft, the more information you can have on these guys, the better that Bob Quinn's going to feel taking a name off the board in Detroit. And, they're so familiar with this group of players now that I would expect the Lions to draft a lot of guys out of the game.
Certainly. I mean, they had a whole week to spend with those guys. Give us a little bit of insight. We talked a lot about it back in January when it was happening, but give us a little bit of insight of what these coaches got to do with these players and how the scouts got to know them better than most teams around the league will.
Yeah, so I mean, you see it on ESPN and NFL Network, the on-the-field stuff, which is hugely important. I know Coach Patricia runs a really complex defense, so the biggest part there is figuring out how guys learn, first of all, are they capable of learning in this system? Then how do they learn? And then how do they take it to the field? And how do they respond when Matt puts a little pressure on them? Those sort of things. So those are all huge takeaways. But then also all the behind the scenes stuff. There's a lot of events down here during Senior Bowl week where they can see these guys in a more relaxed environment. Whether it be just at training table in the morning, having breakfast with them, or, we had a Mardi Gras parade this year that Coach Patricia rode in, just to see the guys interact with, people in the city. There's a ton of takeaways. And I will say, this is only my second year at the Senior Bowl, but the Lions staff really rolled up their sleeves and got to work down here. Talking to Matt right off the bat, he talked to a lot of other coaches that coached in our game. He looked at a lot of tape from previous years on what drills other teams ran or didn't run. So they came down here with a plan, and I know there was a lot of great takeaways for them.
Well, you are well familiar with NFL front offices, having worked in them. You know how the New England Patriots work. I thought it was really interesting, something that you talked about on Twitter recently about that system that they grade players with. We talk a lot on draft Twitter about guys being first rounders, second rounders, things like that. Give us a little bit of insight of how scouting staffs actually approach these things.
Yeah, and that's what I try to use the Twitter for. I mean, one, it's a nice recruiting tool for us and connect with the players, but also I think I try to, educate a little bit, some of the behind the scenes stuff, pull the curtain back a little bit for people that haven't worked in the NFL, how things work. So yeah, you see a lot of first round, this guy's a first rounder. No, he's not. Going back to our time in New England, Coach Patricia, Bob Quinn were there at the same time. It was about my fourth or fifth year in. Coach Belichick and Scott Pioli came up with a grading scale, and it was really role-based. Again, the Patriot system and now the Detroit Lions way Matt's doing things, very role-specific. So rather than saying a guy's a first-rounder, Scott's thing was, well, what is a first-rounder? What does that even mean? So you assign value to a certain position of what that guy's going to be 3 years into the league. That's really where you feel like you know what the player's going to be 3 years in. Some guys have a really late career breakout, but for the most part, by year three, you kind of know what you have. So whether that's a third corner who's a starter in sub packages, or it's a fourth receiver, or a fourth receiver with special teams value, or not special teams value, they all were assigned a different value on the board, and it all kind of lined up. It's a really great grading scale. It's a great way of doing it because, one, it forces your scouts to really be definitive. You can't be wishy-washy in that system. You really have to define what this guy's going to be for the Detroit Lions. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't talked to them if they've carried that same grading scale over, but I have to think there's at least some variation in the Lions building of that system.
Most likely. We certainly know Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia came over from New England, so it will be interesting to see how they end up selecting players in this draft. Jim, They've got some needs as they head into the draft, probably at the pass rusher position, maybe on the interior of the offensive line. Maybe you end up drafting a backup quarterback. Are there any players that you worked with in Mobile that really stuck out at some of these positions of need for the Lions?
Yeah, there's a bunch. And again, it's not just the guys on their team. You know, they coached the North team this year. There was plenty of players on the South they had the same, pretty much the same exposure to, maybe not in the meeting rooms, but all the behind the scenes stuff, you know, on the field stuff, they were right up there in the same drills. So you look at the team they coached, offensive line needs. There was a bunch of good centers down here, guys that could play center and guard. Lloyd Cushenberry from LSU is a really interesting player. Matt Hennessy from Temple. Both those guys were junior centers in our game. They're going to go somewhere in the second round, probably. You know, they're going to be very good starting centers in the league. They had Josh Jones, the left tackle from Houston, on their team. He's probably out of that top half of the first round mix, probably more later first, early second round if they wanted to go that direction as a tackle. They had Matt Parrott from UConn, Bob Quinn's alma mater, really long, great feet. You know, kind of a guy that if you didn't have to start him this year and you could develop him, year two, you might have a really, really good player. So offensive line, there's a lot of options. At wideout, this was the best receiver group that the Senior Bowl's had in a long time. You know, Denzel Mims from Baylor kind of made his name down here, was really probably more of a fourth round guy coming into the week, and now he's being talked about in the end of the first round. Really good player. Van Jefferson from Florida, I think, is going to be the steal of this year's draft. A year ago, we had Terry McLaurin in our game from Ohio State, who went late in the third round and ended up being on the all-rookie team and you know, was just short of 1,000 yards as a rookie, which is incredible. I think Van's a very similar guy. So yeah, they're good players across the board. And then you talked about quarterback, maybe a little bit of backup quarterback. I know they're not going to probably shoot high on one, but Anthony Gordon from Washington State is a really interesting guy. You know, last year we had Gardner Minshew in the Senior Bowl. He did great things as a rookie, as a sixth-round pick for Jacksonville, and it looks like they're kind of moving in that direction where he might be their guy long-term. I mean, Anthony Gordon has a similar baller quality to him. You just get him out there. He's got some sandlot to him. When things aren't perfect, he can move around and make plays and sling the ball in all sorts of arm angles. He played really well in our game. He had 2 touchdown passes, so he would be a guy really smart. So he would be a guy I think that would interest the Lions later on.
How about those pass rushers? Who stood out there?
Yeah, a lot of good pass rushers. And again, it comes in all different shapes and sizes. So like, you know, Kenny Willekes in your backyard from East Lansing, Michigan State guy, Grand Rapids kid, had a really good game, had 2 sacks in the game. He had a great game. Bradley and I from Utah was also on the Lions North team. He had a couple sacks in the game. He's Utah's all-time leading sack guy. And then if you go inside, some bigger guys like Jason Strobridge from North Carolina was on their team, had a really nice week. Marlon Davidson was on the South team from Auburn, another guy you can move up and down the front and can get to the quarterback. So different shapes and sizes, but if they want to upgrade pass rush, there was a lot of different options down here in Mobile.
I love how well you know the players. You know where they're from. You know their background. It just shows how much you guys do at the Senior Bowl in researching these players. I also found it interesting that you said that the Lions would know the South team just as well as they would know the North team. North team is actually the one that they coached. Why is it that they would know the South team so well?
Because we don't restrict the number of passes for on-field people. If you're coaching in the game, everyone can be down on the field. For other teams, the other 30 teams that aren't participating in the game, they get two field passes. It's usually the head coach and the GM are down on the field. So they're right in the mix. And you just look at last year's game, and that's really all I have to draw upon working with the game. And you look at San Francisco, and they got Deebo Samuel, and he wasn't on their team. And you know, likewise, the Raiders had 8 Senior Bowl guys on their roster this year. The Week 17 roster, they had 8 Senior Bowl alums from the year before, and a bunch of those guys, I want to say like 5 or 6 were from the other team. So yeah, it's not just, if you're a Lions fan, don't just look at the North roster. Check out that South roster too, because the Lions should have as good a feel for those guys as the guys that they had on the North.
Good stuff. I love that insight. Thank you so much, Jim, for spending some time with us. Hope you are staying safe and healthy. We appreciate all the good times that we had in Mobile, and we think we might be seeing some of those players come draft time headed to Detroit. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Tori. It's fun.